Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Canadian Federal Election Prediction Series. I'm one day late, mostly because I waited too long yesterday waiting to see if we were actually going to have a fall election. I guess that would be a December election, probably. And then I ran out of time to make the video, so I'm a day late. I'm releasing the video today, though. Huzzah. So, I guess the bright side is I managed to capture an Ecos poll into this projection that I wouldn't have if I made it yesterday. So, happy silver linings. So, couple things we have seen. NDP have clawed back a seat in British Columbia. Liberals have gained a seat in Manitoba, have gained a seat in Nova Scotia. PEI has been bumped up to a safer level. Saskatchewan's a bit less safe. And Conservatives have gained one in Quebec from the Bloc. That's the rapid fire changes. But we are seeing some trends going on. Notably, the Conservatives are starting to do much better in Quebec. And the NDP are doing worse everywhere. And actually, to reinforce this, I will just switch over to this other view. So, I guess, okay, so scroll over here, and you'll notice I made a bunch of these trend charts. I call these ones growth because, I don't know, naming conventions are dumb. Now, if you look at all these, we have an R-squared value for Greens of 0.09, R-squared for the Bloc, 0.17, R-squared value for Liberals, 0.14, R-squared value for the Conservatives, 0.04. In generally speaking, R-squared values, the rough interpretation of them, for those who have not taken much statistics in their life, is how much of the variance in the y variable can be explained with the x variable. So in this case, my x variable is time and my y variable is voting support. So you can see 17% of the Bloc support could be, in principle, can be justified by time. But if you just take the square root of the r squared, so you just get the r, you get the correlation value. And generally speaking, if you're less than like a correlation of 0.4, barring a large sample size, obviously these are all tiny sample sizes. This is 5 weeks rolling trend. So the sample sizes are quite small, so the correlations have to be quite high for it to be taken seriously. So like we look at the Green or the Conservatives, the r squared, or the correlation value you're going to get once you square root that r squared is essentially 0. For the Greens, it's 0.3, and the Conservatives, it's even less. It's 0.2. So, in general, we can consider Green, Bloc, Conservative, and Liberals flat. The correlation's low enough that I don't, and the sample size is small enough that I do not expect that this actually captures meaningful trends. Conversely, though, with the NDP here, we have a correlation of 0.7 and an r squared of 0.53. That is, the rough back of the envelope calculation here, a larger r squared than the other 4 combined. You look at this graph, most of these are pretty subtle. You can barely see movement, which makes sense. We're talking, like for the Conservatives, the largest upward movement was 0.13. The Liberals, the largest movement period was the first week. Greens actually can see some movement too, but the NDP, you can see quite a significant go down from October 7th to today. So just 2 weeks. October 7th was the high point in my model so far. 16.17. They've now lost nearly a point overall to 15.23. And I think you're going to continue seeing that. Unless NDP changes their political tactics, because I think they are suffering from, I guess the best way to describe this is the NDP's always had a very tricky time because the odds of the NDP ever forming a government are really low. So they need a minority government to really get anything done. But when you are the junior partner in a two-party coalition, or an informal two-party coalition, it can really hurt you because you don't generally get a lot of credit for what's done, and you generally take all of the blame. Because if we look at right now, the Liberal Party does something bad, the NDP gets the blame because they're supporting them and allowing the Liberal government to continue. The Liberal government does something good, that doesn't actually mean the NDP are going to get, the boost. Are going to get credit for it. They could, but unlikely. If you've seen the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple big votes that the NDP has sided with the Liberals on, which I think are really hurting them because obviously people getting polled are the politically inclined or the people who are paying attention, because otherwise you would, like, if you look at some of the ledger polls that exist, I won't pull them up right now, but 19% of the people are refused, would not vote, would spoil ballot, undecided. Those are the people who get hit in the polls who don't really follow that stuff that much, generally speaking. Like, if you're someone who does vote but you're undecided, you probably haven't been paying much attention, generally speaking. Obviously, there's some undecided people because they're swingy, but at any given moment in politics, if you're undecided, it's probably because you weren't paying attention. It's between election cycles, I should say. Because why would you? It's not like you can vote, so you only need to pay enough attention to know what's going on, not know who did what. So I guess the point I'm making is that the decided NDP voters, or the decided voters, are starting to favor against the NDP because those are likely the people who are paying attention and notice what the NDP are pushing for, and that they're propping up this Liberal government time and time again on very flimsy reasons, and they're not really holding them accountable for the nonsense that's going on. The interesting thing here is, so what, the NDP lost about a point. The Greens have obviously gained a bunch in this. They've gained about 0.6, it seems. But where did the rest of the support go? Some of it maybe went to the People's Party, which would be surprising, to say the least. Now, just because you voted NDP doesn't mean you are completely NDP. Like, I know people in my personal life who vote NDP for union reasons, but otherwise are very conservative people. Maybe they decide to break People's Party, but that would be weird, because People's Party is, generally speaking, more hostile to unions than the Conservative Party. So if you think they would have broken right wing, they would have went to the Conservative Party. So that's kind of an interesting trend there. The Liberals look like they might have sucked up a bit of the NDP support that has bled over the last 3 weeks. But at the same token, maybe not. Or if you look at the whole 5-week stretch, you could argue that maybe the Liberals have sucked up 0.4 of the NDP support, and the Green have only got like 2.2. But that's neither here nor there. Who gained support and who lost support, and by what margin, doesn't really matter, per se. What matters here is the trend going on. So we have this recent trend where the People's Party is doing significantly better. Mind you, it's still insignificant because, barring the People's Party being able to concentrate their votes, like if we look at this province-wise, the Manitoba is their largest with 2.3. But if you look at my model's prediction in Manitoba, There's no single seat in Manitoba where the People's Party has more than 3 points in support. Some around 1. So unless they can consolidate that support in a meaningful seat, any growth in the People's Party doesn't matter. That's basically the Green and the NDP's problem, really, because if you look at 15%, let's switch back to the other map here, for a second. So we saw in this chart, one second. So when we saw in the graph was the NDP are about 15% overall, but they're only going to get about 22 seats. Obviously, there's 338 seats, so if they were efficient votes, you would expect 51-ish seats. So they're getting very inefficient voting. And a couple of reasons for that. One, I think the biggest one, you look at Ontario, for example. No, Saskatchewan's a better one. So you look at Saskatchewan. They get 18.6% of the votes in Saskatchewan, but they get 0 seats because they get a couple ridings where they're getting... And actually, Saskatchewan's not even the worst one because they're concentrated in really 2 ridings. If I had a riding by riding map, I could show it to you, but one of them, I believe it's Regina West, and the other is Northern Saskatchewan. Those are the 2 ridings where the NDP are very concentrated. Another example, though, you look at Newfoundland. NDP are extremely concentrated in St. John's. They get a seat there. Saskatchewan, they're more spread out. They get 0. Same thing with Ontario. They're concentrated in a few ridings, so they actually gain seats. Quebec, with a very similar amount of NDP support, more spread out across Montreal, they get 1 seat. And this is really where you're seeing a lot of the differences with why the Liberals are so far ahead with only about 37 points overall of support, is because the Liberals get almost no support in Alberta, Saskatchewan, get a small amount of support in BC, but hyper-efficient support in BC, almost all of it in suburban Vancouver and downtown Vancouver. They have extremely efficient support in Quebec, getting almost nothing outside of Sherbrooke and Montreal and Gatineau. Those 3 areas, they have a lot of support. So basically, the areas that have the most English-speaking population, in Quebec, the Liberals have the most support. And then everywhere else, they get almost nothing. They have a bit of support in, like, downtown Quebec, but generally speaking, the English parts of Quebec, very efficient Liberal support. They get about half the seats, about less, with like a third of the vote. Ontario, they're getting like 40% of the vote, almost all the seats, because they win tons of ridings in Vancouver and GTA by a comfortable margin, and they lose a lot of the rural ridings by a lot. So you see the problem the Conservatives have really had in these elections is, for example, you look at Alberta, the last election. There's a couple seats like Fort McMurray where the Conservative candidate won by, I think, plus 80, which is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous margin to win by. But if you think about it, a win by plus 80 and a win by plus 0.01 is the same thing. You won the seat. I guess a win by plus 80 is better for the politician, but it is worse for the party. Because last election, Liberals got the Conservatives got 34.4% of the vote. But they won a ton of votes in Alberta, Saskatchewan. Way blew past winning all of the seats by a ton. And they barely lost GTA. So, where am I going with this? You might be asking yourself. Might sound like I'm just rambling, but no, I do have a point here. So, what we're seeing right now in Canadian politics is the Liberals are managing to hold on to their Ontario dominance, which almost certainly, barring some new movement, is going to continue to get them reelected. I think right here they've lost one, maybe 2 seats. I don't remember the exact number of seats that the Liberals and Conservatives won in 2019. So maybe, I know they're down. I'm not sure if it was 79 or 80 the Liberals had. But 1 or 2 seats doesn't really matter. Especially since the Liberals have picked up a seat in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC, and Manitoba. Admittedly, they lost a seat in Ontario and New Brunswick. But these are good. This is good news for the Liberals. And really bad news for anyone who doesn't want the Liberals. Because barring, the Conservatives are near their saturation point in BC, even though they're losing the popular vote here in BC, which popular vote that has literally no effect on these elections, period. They're losing, the Conservatives in BC are hyper efficient voting right now in my model. It's peak efficiency. It's you can't get more efficient than having fewer votes in the province and winning more seats. Especially when you're talking about, I think my model has them winning, just give me a second. Has, the Conservatives down 1.4 points and the Liberals and getting 2 more seats, so, that's pretty big. But there's not a lot of room to grow, barring the Conservatives pushing up to, the 40% margin. I guess then you have some room to grow in, North BC. But I think overall, maybe 8 seats in BC. They might be able to pick up 1 more seat in Alberta, Saskatchewan, maybe 2 in Manitoba. So you look at that. What does that put us at? Let's say 2 in Manitoba, 1 in Alberta, 1 in Saskatchewan, 8 in BC. That's 12. And let's say they all take them from the Liberals, and not any seats were taken from the NDP, which is not going to happen because I think at least 4 of the seats that the Conservatives could hypothetically win would be from NDP. So no, let's factor that in. Then put the Conservatives at 132 and the Liberals at 154. Still a comfortable Liberal minority. Obviously, NDP is only at 18, but 18 NDP, 154 Liberal, 1 Green. That's still a functioning Liberal minority that could last an arbitrarily long time. Because the NDP has proven time and again they're not willing to fight an election because Singh is destroying the party. He keeps siding with Liberals on all of these issues, has taken his party in a very radical way, is pushing very left-wing policies, and he's the big issue is the NDP and the Green are competing for the same voters. The exact same. And these voters they're competing for are largely young, university-educated, or currently being university-educated voters, people, citizens, who don't have the money to donate to political parties, don't have the habit of donating to political parties, don't have the desire to donate to political parties. And also, don't vote. At least to the same margin. Old people in Canada vote. I think 80-90% of them vote. Young people, it's closer to 40-50. It's worse in the U.S., but obviously voter turnout in the U.S. is worse than Canada to begin with. We generally get 60-70 range. They get 40 to 60 range. So the point here is for the foreseeable future, barring big polling shifts. I think we can safely assume the Liberals are going to cling on to a lead for the foreseeable future. The Conservatives really need to make a breakthrough in Ontario or the Maritimes. It's unlikely they're going to make a breakthrough in Quebec because the areas where the Conservatives are gaining ground in Quebec are taking from the Bloc, which, I mean, good and all. I mean, for the Conservatives, they're getting more seats, but it's not denting the Liberals. Like, the Conservatives, to add on to this 12-seat hypothetical gain, could gain up to 4 more seats in Quebec if they continue at 20-22% range. I think they've been polling like 2022 in some polls. So if those some polls are correct, now the polling average is like 18, I believe. But if they're the upper end of the polls, like the 2022s, are correct, they could theoretically pick up 4 more seats, so about 15 in Quebec, all from the Bloc. Mind you, some of these seats would still be very unlikely, but conceivable. It's conceivable pickup. That would put the Conservatives at 136. That still doesn't affect the fact the Liberals have a functioning governing majority. And you look at New Brunswick. Right now, New Brunswick has rejected Fredericton and the three ridings that the Conservatives already won in 2019. They could maybe pick up 2 more, Miramichi and St. John. Which are cool. They pick up those 2. And let's look at Nova Scotia. The Central Nova and what's the other? Cumberland Colchester. And let's say Cape Breton too. Both Cape Breton riding. That's 4 more. And sure, they pick up Egmont and PEI. I think that's really the best you can expect the Conservatives are going to do in the Maritimes in the near future. They'll be picking up 7 ridings. That's a lot of ridings. So now we're talking about taking 15 from the Liberals. So the Liberals are sitting at 152, 147. NDP are at 18. So now you're talking about 2 parties have to support a Liberal minority. The Conservatives still only at 143, so you're still seeing a Liberal minority government. This is my point. Voting efficiency is a big deal, and the NDP going down is really bad for the NDP, but very good for the Liberals, because that means a lot of the vote splitting that can happen in Ontario is not going to happen in Ontario. Because if what it looks like is happening, there's some NDPers jumping on the Liberal train, which would be your NDP Liberal swing voter. That's not good for anybody else. It's great for the Liberals. So for those Liberals in the audience, this is great news for you. You're in a very solid electoral position right now. That said, I think it's really difficult for the Liberals to win a majority government right now. Getting that extra 9 seats might not seem like a lot, but it would be very tricky. Your only real place to pick, the only real seats the Liberals could pick up are like 3 or 4 in BC and Fredericton. Maybe 1 in Manitoba, so maybe 6 seats are in play, which still doesn't put the Liberals into a majority government territory, so it'll be very difficult for them to get back to majority, but it'll be very, very difficult for the Conservatives to win a government. Obviously, the Bloc cannot win a government unless they decide to run people outside of Quebec. If the Green win a majority government, I'm going to say that election should be redone, because that would be highly suspect. Same with the NDP. They're just polling too low to assume for that to conceivably happen. Not only are they polling too low, but they're polling in less than half the seats. Like, the only... What's the best way to phrase this? Less than half the seats in the country do they have any meaningful seat totals. So, that's not surprising. But we're in interesting ground. We'll see next week if Trudeau's gambit this week to try to force an election paid off. Obviously, the election did not get forced because the NDP chickened out. I suspect it's probably going to hurt him. But what are we talking about hurting? Are we talking about 1 point, 2 points, 10 points, 37 points? Probably not 37. Probably not even 10. But maybe. We'll see. Until next week, hope you all have a good week. If you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe. Comment down below what you thought. If you have any ideas or 2 cents to throw into the subject matter. I love the discussion. Obviously, we had no discussion any of the previous 3 weeks, but I would love discussion. I like the discussion on the US videos, so these ones, I would love more discussion. Otherwise, I hope you all have a good week.